Mother Grizzly Bear found a forest ranger chained to a tree, what she did put everyone in tears. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The morning mist hung low between the ancient pines as Connor Adams checked his map one more time. The 28-year-old forest ranger had been tracking a group of poachers for weeks, following their trail deeper into the Blackwater National Forest. This remote section of wilderness had become a hunting ground for men who cared nothing for conservation laws or the delicate balance of the ecosystem Connor had sworn to protect. Just a little farther, Connor whispered to himself, his breath forming small clouds in the crisp autumn air. The radio at his belt crackled with static before the voice of his supervisor broke through. "Adams, what's your position?" "You were supposed to check in an hour ago." Connor unclipped the radio and pressed the talk button. "Sorry, Chief. I'm about 3 miles north of Elk Creek. Found fresh tire tracks heading toward the old logging road." "Be careful out there," his supervisor warned. "These guys aren't amateurs. Rangers in the Northern District caught one of their traps last week. Nearly took off Miller's leg." "Copy that. I'm just going to follow the tracks a bit more, then head back before dark." Connor tucked the radio away and adjusted his forest green jacket. At 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders built from years of wilderness work, he usually felt confident patrolling his territory alone. But something about today made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The forest was too quiet. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush, just the soft whisper of wind through the pines. He moved cautiously through a small clearing, scanning the ground for more signs of the poachers. That's when he noticed fresh boot prints in the soft earth, different from his own standard-issue hiking boots. Connor crouched down to examine them more closely, tracing the outline with his finger. "Definitely not hikers," he muttered. The tread pattern matched what they'd found at illegal hunting sites, distinctive zigzag patterns from expensive tactical boots. Connor stood and followed the tracks, his hand instinctively resting on the bear spray at his belt. The prints led toward a dense thicket of brush about 50 yards ahead. Something about the way the branches were arranged looked unnatural, as if they had been deliberately placed to hide something. As he approached, a twig snapped behind him. Connor spun around just as a heavy object struck the back of his head. Pain exploded across his skull before darkness swallowed his consciousness. When Connor opened his eyes, the afternoon sun was slanting through the trees. His head throbbed mercilessly, and something warm and sticky had dried on the side of his face. Blood. He tried to reach up to touch the wound, but his hands wouldn't move. Panic surged through him as he realized his situation. His back was pressed against the rough bark of a massive pine tree, his wrists bound behind it with heavy chains that bit into his skin. His ankles were similarly secured, wrapped tightly with coils of rusted chain that offered no give when he strained against them. "Help!" Connor called out, his voice sounding weak even to his own ears. "Anybody out there?" Only the wind answered, whistling through the trees with callous indifference to his plight. Connor twisted his neck to look around. His radio was gone, as was his backpack with his emergency supplies. The poachers had taken everything useful, even the knife he kept in his boot. They'd left him to die slowly, chained to a tree in a part of the forest rarely visited by hikers, especially as the weather turned colder. Hours passed. The sun began its descent behind the mountains, taking with it what little warmth it had provided. Connor's throat grew raw from shouting for help, and his wrists bled where the chains had rubbed the skin away. Thirst tormented him as much as the fear of what would happen when night fell completely. "Think, Adams," he urged himself. You know these woods better than anyone." But knowledge of the forest wouldn't loosen metal chains or summon help from miles away. His best hope was that when he didn't return, search parties would be sent out. But that could take days, and the temperature would drop well below freezing tonight. As twilight painted the forest in shades of blue and gray, Connor heard a sound that made his blood run cold, the distinctive huffing of a bear. Not just any bear, but the low, rumbling breath of a grizzly. "No, no, no," he whispered, his heart pounding against his ribs. Through the gathering shadows, Connor saw her, an enormous grizzly bear with thick brown fur that shimmered in the fading light. She stood on all fours at the edge of the clearing, her nose lifted to the air, testing it for scents. Behind her, a smaller shape moved cautiously. Her cub, no more than a year old, staying close to its mother's massive form. Connor knew the protocol for bear encounters by heart. Make yourself look big, make noise, never run. But chained to a tree, he could do none of these things. He was completely vulnerable, unable to defend himself or escape. The mother bear turned her head toward him, her small eyes fixed on the strange sight of a human bound to a tree. She huffed again and took a step forward, then another. The cub stayed back, watching curiously from behind a fallen log. "Easy," Connor said, trying to keep his voice steady despite his terror. "Easy, girl." The bear tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words. She approached slowly, each massive paw landing silently on the forest floor. When she was just 15 feet away, she rose onto her hind legs, towering over 7 feet tall, her front paws dangling as she studied the chained man. Connor closed his eyes, certain these would be his final moments. He thought of his parents, his sister in Seattle who had just had her first baby, a niece he would never meet now. He thought of the forest he had dedicated his life to protecting. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though he wasn't sure if he was apologizing to his family or to the bear about to end his life. The sound of heavy breathing grew closer. Connor could smell the musky odor of the bear's fur, feel the heat radiating from her massive body. Something warm and wet touched his cheek. The bear's nose, sniffing at the dried blood on his face. Connor kept his eyes squeezed shut, his body trembling uncontrollably as he waited for powerful jaws to close around his throat or massive claws to tear through his flesh. Instead, he felt the bear's hot breath moving down his body, sniffing at his jacket, his belt, his legs. Then, unexpectedly, he felt pressure against the chains at his wrists. Connor opened his eyes in shock. The grizzly had moved behind the tree and was pawing at the chains that bound him, her enormous claws scraping against the metal links. The cub had ventured closer now, watching its mother with obvious curiosity. "What are you doing?" Connor whispered in disbelief. The bear continued pawing at the chains, her powerful muscles flexing beneath her thick fur. With each swipe, the links shifted slightly against the tree bark. Connor hardly dared to breathe. Was it possible? Could this wild animal somehow sense his predicament? Or was she simply curious about the unnatural metal object wrapped around the tree? Either way, hope flickered in Connor's chest for the first time since he'd awakened in chains. If the bear's actions weakened even one link enough for him to break free, he might have a chance to survive. As the last light faded from the sky and the forest plunged into darkness, Connor Adams found himself in the most unlikely alliance, trapped, injured, and freezing, yet somehow being aided by one of the most feared predators in the wilderness. Tears welled in his eyes, born of fear, pain, and a strange, overwhelming gratitude toward the massive creature working at his bonds. In the cold, dark forest, An impossible connection was forming between man and bear, one that would change both their lives forever. Night fell completely over Blackwater National Forest, bringing with it a bone-chilling cold that seeped through Connor's jacket. His fingers had gone numb hours ago, making it impossible to feel if the bear's efforts were having any effect on the chains. The Grizzly worked tirelessly, her massive paws scraping and pulling at the metal links, occasionally letting out frustrated huffs when they refused to give way. The cub had settled on a bed of pine needles nearby, watching with intelligent eyes that reflected the pale moonlight filtering through the canopy. Once or twice, it approached Connor cautiously, sniffing at his boots before retreating to safety when its mother growled a warning. "That's right," Connor murmured, his voice hoarse from thirst and cold. "Keep your little one safe." He had spent enough time studying these magnificent creatures to know that mother bears were fiercely protective of their young. The fact that this one had not only refrained from attacking him, but seemed determined to free him, defied everything he thought he knew about wildlife behavior. As the hours crept by, Connor drifted in and out of consciousness. Each time his head drooped forward, the pain from his injury would jolt him awake again. In his more lucid moments, he wondered if he was hallucinating the entire scenario: the bear, the chains, perhaps even the attack. Maybe he had fallen during his patrol and hit his head, and this was all some elaborate dream his oxygen-deprived brain had conjured up. But the pain was too real, the cold too biting, and the sounds of the bear's efforts too persistent to be a figment of his imagination. Sometime in the darkest hours of the night, Connor heard a new sound, the snap of a branch nearby, followed by hushed voices. His heart leaped with hope. Rescuers? Had the search party found him already? "Hello," he called out, his voice stronger than he expected. "Over here! I'm chained to a tree!" The voices immediately fell silent. Then came the unmistakable sound of a rifle being cocked. Not rescuers. The poachers had returned. The mother bear stopped her work on the chains and swung her massive head toward the sound, rising onto her hind legs with a threatening growl that rumbled through the clearing like distant thunder. Her cub scampered behind the tree where Connor was bound, pressing its small body against his legs as if seeking protection. "What was that?" a gruff voice whispered from the darkness. "Sounded like a bear," another replied, and someone shouting. "It's probably that ranger we left, thought he'd be dead by now. We should make sure. Boss wants no witnesses." Connor's blood ran cold. They were coming to finish what they'd started. And now, not only his life was in danger, but also the bear and her cub who had inexplicably tried to help him. "Go," Connor hissed at the bear, though he knew she couldn't understand him. "Take your cub and go." Instead, the grizzly dropped back to all fours and moved to position herself between Connor and the approaching voices. Her massive body blocked his view, but he could hear the men coming closer, their footsteps crunching on fallen leaves. "Jesus Christ," one of them swore, as a flashlight beam cut through the darkness and illuminated the scene. "It's a damn grizzly!" "Shoot it," ordered a second voice, deeper than the first. "Then we'll deal with the ranger." "I ain't shooting no mother bear with a cub, Joe. That's bad luck." "You superstitious idiot, give me the rifle." Connor strained against his chains, desperation giving him newfound strength. "Run!" he shouted at the bear, as if volume could somehow bridge the species barrier. "They'll kill you both." What happened next unfolded so quickly that Connor's mind struggled to process it. The mother bear charged toward the voices with a roar that shook the very ground. There was a gunshot, a scream, then another shot. The flashlight went flying, its beam spinning crazily across the trees before disappearing. Men shouted in panic. Something, or someone, crashed through the underbrush. The bear roared again, the sound now more distant, as if she was pursuing the fleeing poachers. The cub whimpered, pressing closer to Connor's legs. He wished he could reach down to comfort it, to assure it that its mother would return. But all he could do was stand there, listening to the chaos fade into the distance, leaving behind an eerie silence punctuated only by the cub's frightened whines. "It's okay," Connor whispered to the small bear. "Your mom is tough. She'll be back." Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The cub eventually settled, curling up at Connor's feet, its small body providing an unexpected pocket of warmth against his frozen legs. Despite his dire situation, Connor marveled at the trust this wild creature was showing him. Finally, heavy footfalls announced the return of the mother bear. She emerged from the shadows, her fur gleaming silver in the moonlight. To Connor's relief, she appeared unharmed, though her muzzle was dark with what he suspected might be blood. Had she killed the poachers? Connor wasn't sure how to feel about that possibility. As a ranger, he believed in justice through the legal system. But as a man fighting for survival in the wilderness, abandoned to die by these same men, he couldn't find it in himself to mourn them if they had indeed met their end at the bear's claws. The grizzly nudged her cub gently, checking it over with typical maternal concern before returning to her work at Connor's chains. She seemed even more determined now, as if the confrontation with the poachers had reinforced her resolve to free this human from his bonds. Just when Connor had begun to believe it was hopeless, he felt a subtle shift in the tension of the chains around his wrists. The bear had managed to bend one of the links, creating a small gap. It wasn't much, but it was something. "That's it," he encouraged, wiggling his hands to test the new weakness. "Just a little more." The mother bear seemed to understand, focusing her efforts on that same spot. Her powerful jaws closed around the weakened link, teeth grinding against metal with a sound that set Connor's teeth on edge. Then, with a sudden jerk of her massive head, she pulled. The chain snapped. Connor felt his hands come free, the sudden release sending shooting pains up his arms as blood rushed back into his numb fingers. He nearly cried out with relief, bringing his hands around to his front, wincing at the raw, bleeding skin around his wrists. "Thank you," he breathed, looking into the bear's small, intelligent eyes. "Thank you." But he wasn't free yet. The chains around his ankles still held him securely to the tree, and his muscles were so stiff from cold and immobility that he doubted he could walk even if he did get loose. Still, having his hands free was a massive improvement. He could now attempt to work on the ankle chains himself, perhaps using a rock or stick as a tool. As he bent awkwardly to examine his ankle bonds, a new sound froze him in place. Voices again, but different ones this time. Flashlight beams bobbed through the trees, coming from the direction opposite where the poachers had fled. "Connor Adams." This time, it was a voice he recognized, Savannah Reed, his fellow ranger and friend. Relief washed over him in a dizzying wave. "Here!" he shouted. "I'm over here!" The bear and her cub, startled by his sudden volume, backed away several paces. Connor feared they would run, that he'd never see them again and no one would believe his story of the grizzly that had tried to free him. But they stopped at the edge of the clearing, watching as the search party approached. "My God," Savannah gasped as she broke through the tree line, her flashlight illuminating Connor chained to the tree. Behind her came 3 other rangers and a local sheriff's deputy. "Connor, what happened to you?" "Poachers," he managed to croak, his throat painfully dry. "They ambushed me, chained me up." "Your hands," Savannah started, noticing his freed wrists. "That's the unbelievable part," Connor said, nodding toward the edge of the clearing where the bears still lingered. She helped me. The Grizzly. All flashlights swung in the direction he indicated, illuminating the mother bear and her cub. The search party froze, hands moving instinctively toward weapons. "Don't!" Connor shouted. "Don't hurt them. They've been protecting me." Savannah looked from Connor to the bears and back again. Disbelief etched across her features. "Connor, you've got a head injury. You're not thinking clearly." "I know how it sounds," he admitted, "but it's true. The poachers came back. They were going to kill me. She charged them, drove them off. Then she broke the chain on my wrists." The deputy stepped forward, bolt cutters in hand. "Let's get you loose first, then you can tell us all about your bear friend." His tone made it clear he didn't believe a word of it. As the deputy worked on cutting through the ankle chains, Connor kept his eyes on the bears. The mother was growing visibly anxious, shifting her weight from paw to paw, huffing warnings as the humans crowded around her unlikely friend. "Back up. Give her space," Connor urged the search party. "She's nervous about all of you being so close to her cub." To everyone's surprise, Savannah took a step back, then another, urging the others to do the same. She had worked with Connor long enough to trust his judgment when it came to wildlife, no matter how strange the circumstances. The final chain fell away, and Connor nearly collapsed as circulation returned painfully to his feet. Savannah and another ranger caught him, supporting his weight between them. "We need to get you to a hospital," Savannah said, examining the wound on his head with gentle fingers. "You've lost a lot of blood, and you're showing signs of hypothermia." Connor nodded weakly, but his eyes remained on the bears. "What about them?" "The poachers might come back." "We found 2 men about a quarter-mile from here," the deputy said. "One with a broken arm, the other with some nasty claw marks across his chest. They're in custody now, claiming a bear attacked them for no reason." A grim smile touched Connor's cracked lips. Not for no reason. As the search party prepared to help Connor back to their vehicles, the mother bear made a soft, chuffing sound. The cub bounded over to her, and together they began to move deeper into the forest, disappearing among the trees like shadows melting into darkness. "Wait," Connor called weakly. "I didn't say thank you." Savannah exchanged concerned glances with the other rangers. "Connor, you need medical attention. You're not thinking straight." But Connor knew what he had experienced, regardless of whether anyone believed him. He had formed a connection with that bear that defied explanation. A moment of understanding between species that transcended the natural order. And somehow, he knew their paths would cross again. As they helped him through the forest toward the waiting vehicles, Connor looked back one last time at the spot where the bears had disappeared. For a moment, he thought he glimpsed golden eyes watching from between the trees, but it might have been just a trick of the flashlight beams on the foliage. "I'll come back," he whispered, too quietly for the others to hear. "I'll find you again." Little did Connor know how prophetic those words would prove to be, or how soon their paths would indeed cross once more, under circumstances even more extraordinary than their first encounter. The hospital in the small town of Pine Ridge was ill-equipped for serious trauma cases, but it was the closest medical facility to Blackwater National Forest. By the time Connor was wheeled through its doors, the sun was just beginning to rise, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold that he observed through half-closed eyes from the stretcher. Dr. Lily Morgan met them at the entrance, her auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, dark circles under her eyes suggesting she'd been on duty all night. Despite her evident fatigue, her movements were quick and precise as she assessed Connor's condition. Severe laceration to the back of the head, possible concussion, abrasions on wrists and ankles, mild to moderate hypothermia. she listed professionally as nurses transferred Connor to an examination table. How long was he exposed to the elements? At least 12 hours, maybe more, Savannah replied, hovering anxiously nearby. He was attacked yesterday afternoon. Dr. Morgan's eyes widened slightly. And he survived a night outdoors in these temperatures? That's remarkable. You don't know the half of it, Savannah said, glancing at Connor with a mixture of concern and wonder. He claims a bear helped keep him alive. The doctor paused in her examination of Connor's head wound. A bear? It's true, Connor mumbled, wincing as she probed the tender area. A grizzly and her cub, she broke the chains. Dr. Morgan exchanged a look with a Savannah that Connor recognized all too well. The silent communication between rational people confronted with what seemed like the delusions of an injured man. Let's focus on getting you stabilized, the doctor said diplomatically. We can talk about bears later. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical procedures. Connor's head wound required 12 stitches. X-rays confirmed he had a mild concussion but no skull fracture. His wrists and ankles were cleaned and bandaged, the raw skin there treated with antibiotic ointment. Warm IV fluids gradually raised his core temperature back to normal levels. Through it all, Connor drifted in and out of sleep, his dreams filled with golden eyes and gentle huffs, the strange sensation of a bear's breath on his face as she examined him by moonlight. Each time he awoke, he half expected to see her massive form in the corner of the hospital room, standing guard as she had in the forest. Late that afternoon, as shadows lengthened across the linoleum floor of his hospital room, the door opened to admit Sheriff Jacob Bennett. The weathered lawman removed his hat as he approached Connor's bed, revealing salt and pepper hair cropped close to his scalp. "Ranger Adams," he greeted with a respectful nod. "Glad to see you pulling through." Connor pushed himself up against his pillows, grimacing at the throbbing in his head. "The poachers?" "Haley Dawson and Joe Mercer," the sheriff said, pulling up a plastic chair beside the bed. "Known troublemakers with records in 3 states. They're cooling their heels in my jail now, facing charges of assault on a federal employee, illegal hunting, and about a dozen other violations." "They left me to die," Connor said, his voice harder than he intended. Sheriff Bennett nodded solemnly. "They admitted as much. Said you were getting too close to their operation. They've been running an exotic animal parts ring. Bear gallbladders, elk antlers in velvet, eagle feathers. Shipping them overseas for traditional medicines and such." Connor's hands clenched into fists atop the thin hospital blanket. These were exactly the kind of people he had dedicated his life to stopping. Those who saw wilderness not as something to protect, but as a resource to exploit, regardless of the damage they caused. What about last night? Did they say anything about coming back to the clearing, about the bear? The sheriff's expression shifted subtly. "That's actually why I wanted to talk to you. Their story is unusual." "Let me guess," Connor said with a humorless smile. "They claim they were attacked by a bear for no reason." "Not quite." Sheriff Bennett leaned forward, lowering his voice though they were alone in the room. "They claim they returned to finish what they started. Said when they got there, they found you with a grizzly that seemed to be protecting you." Hope flared in Connor's chest. They saw it too. Then it wasn't just my imagination or the concussion. "I'm not saying I believe in guardian angel bears," the sheriff cautioned, raising a hand. But both men told the same story independently. Said the bear charged them when they approached with weapons, like it was defending you. Dawson got his arm broken when he was knocked down. Mercer took some claw swipes to the chest. Not deep enough to be life-threatening, but he'll have impressive scars. Connor closed his eyes briefly, relief washing through him. He wasn't crazy. He hadn't hallucinated the entire experience. The bear had really tried to help him, and others had witnessed it. "There's something else," the sheriff continued, reaching into his pocket to withdraw a small plastic evidence bag. Inside was a single grizzly bear hair, thick and brown with a silver tip. "We found this caught in one of the chain links still attached to the tree. I had it rushed to the wildlife lab for DNA analysis." Connor took the bag, holding it up to the light to examine the hair. Why? Bears are known to inhabit that part of the forest. Sheriff Bennett's weathered face broke into a rare smile. "Because I've been working these woods for 30 years, son, and I've seen things that defy explanation. If what you and those poachers say is true, this might be the most extraordinary wildlife encounter ever documented in Blackwater." For the first time since his rescue, Connor felt truly understood. The sheriff, unlike the others, wasn't dismissing his story as the fevered imaginings of an injured man. "I need to find her again," Connor said, returning the evidence bag, "to understand why she helped me." The sheriff tucked the bag back into his pocket, his expression turning serious. "You need to rest and recover first. Besides, I'm not sure finding her is a good idea. Whatever happened between you two was unusual. Trying to recreate it might not end so well." Connor wanted to argue, to explain the connection he had felt with the grizzly, but exhaustion was overtaking him again. His eyelids grew heavy despite his efforts to keep them open. "Get some sleep, Ranger," Sheriff Bennett said, rising from the chair. "We'll talk more later." As the sheriff reached the door, Connor called after him, his voice slurring slightly with approaching sleep. "Her cub had a white patch on its chest, like a star." The sheriff paused, turning back with raised eyebrows. "How do you know that?" "It was dark, and you were suffering from exposure and a head injury." "I saw it," Connor mumbled, already half asleep. "When it curled up at my feet, the star on its chest glowed in the moonlight." Sheriff Bennett stood silent for a long moment, watching as Connor drifted off completely. Then, without another word, he left the room, closing the door softly behind him. Outside in the hallway, he nearly collided with Dr. Morgan, who was reviewing Connor's chart. "How is he?" the sheriff asked. Lily glanced up, tucking a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. "Physically, he's recovering well. The concussion is mild, and there's no sign of frostbite despite his prolonged exposure. He's actually in remarkably good condition considering what he went through." "And mentally?" The doctor hesitated. "He's fixated on this story about the bear. It's not uncommon for trauma victims to create narratives that help them process their experiences, but you don't believe him," the sheriff finished for her. "It's not a question of belief, Sheriff. It's about medical science. Grizzly bears, especially mothers with cubs, don't rescue humans. They perceive us as threats and act accordingly." Sheriff Bennett fingered the evidence bag in his pocket, but chose not to mention it. "I've worked in these mountains a long time, Doctor. There are things in these forests that science hasn't fully explained." Dr. Morgan's professional demeanor softened slightly. "You sound like my grandfather. He used to tell stories about the Blackwater bears, said they had ancient souls, that they remembered a time when humans and animals spoke the same language. Smart man, your grandfather," the sheriff said with a nod. "Mine said something similar, called them medicine bears, said they appeared in times of need to those worthy of their help." For a moment, they stood in silence, two practical professionals momentarily allowing themselves to consider possibilities beyond their training. "Well," Dr. Morgan finally said, returning to her clinical tone, Whatever happened out there, Ranger Adams needs rest. I'm keeping him for observation at least until tomorrow." "Understood. Call me when he's ready for discharge. I'll have more questions for him then." As Sheriff Bennett walked away, Lily found herself glancing back at Connor's door. Despite her medical training and scientific mindset, she couldn't help but wonder, what if? What if something truly extraordinary had happened in those woods? What if the rangers and scientists who thought they understood wildlife behavior had only scratched the surface of animal intelligence and compassion? She shook her head, dismissing the fanciful thoughts. Connor Adams had suffered trauma and exposure. His brain, desperate to make sense of his survival, had conjured up a rescuer in the form of the very creature most feared in these mountains. That was the rational explanation, the scientific one, the one she should believe. Yet, as she continued her rounds, the image of a mother bear protecting a wounded human stayed with her, like a half-remembered dream that lingers long after waking. Connor was released from the hospital 3 days later, against Dr. Morgan's recommendation. His head wound was healing well, and the dizziness from his concussion had mostly subsided, but she still believed he needed more rest before returning to active duty. "At least take a week off," she urged as she reluctantly signed his discharge papers. "Your body has been through significant trauma." "I'll rest," Connor promised, though they both knew he had no intention of staying idle. The need to return to the forest, to find the bear and her cub, had grown into an obsession during his hospital stay. Each night, his dreams had been more vivid, filled with images of golden eyes watching him through dense foliage, of massive paws delicately working to free him from chains. Savannah was waiting for him in the hospital lobby, keys dangling from her fingers. "Chief says you're on administrative leave for 2 weeks," she announced as Connor approached. No arguments. "I wasn't going to argue," he replied, adjusting the sling that supported his still tender right arm. The doctors had discovered a minor fracture in his wrist, likely from straining against the chains. Savannah raised a skeptical eyebrow. "So, you're not planning to head straight back to Blackwater to look for your bear friend?" Connor hesitated just long enough to confirm her suspicions. "That's what I thought," she sighed, holding the hospital door open for him. "Which is why I'm taking you to my place instead of yours. My couch is all set up, Chief's orders. I'm your babysitter until you're cleared for duty." "I don't need a babysitter," Connor protested as they walked to her truck. The spring sunshine felt incredible on his face after days under fluorescent hospital lights. "Maybe not, but that bear might." Savannah's expression softened as she helped him into the passenger seat. "Connor, if word gets out about a grizzly that doesn't fear humans, that actually approaches them, there are people who would consider her dangerous, who might decide she needs to be relocated or worse." Connor hadn't considered this perspective, and it sent a chill through him despite the warm day. "You believe me, then? About what happened?" Savannah started the truck, her eyes fixed straight ahead. "I don't know what to believe, but I know you, and you're not the type to make up stories." She pulled out of the hospital parking lot, heading toward her cabin on the outskirts of Pine Ridge. "Besides, those poachers had no reason to lie about being attacked by a bear that was protecting you. They could have claimed you were already dead when they came back, or made up any number of stories that wouldn't involve a protective grizzly." Relief washed over Connor. Having someone believe him, even partially, lifted a weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. "Thank you," he said quietly. Savannah nodded, keeping her eyes on the road. "Just promise me you won't go looking for her alone. If there's something unique about this bear, we need to document it properly, through official channels. Connor made a non-committal sound that wasn't quite agreement. Savannah shot him a warning glance but didn't press the issue further. As they drove through the small town of Pine Ridge, Connor noticed posters in several shop windows, crude drawings of a grizzly bear with the words "Miracle Bear" printed in bold letters. "What's that about?" he asked, pointing to one of the posters. Savannah grimaced. Word got out. Small town, big gossip. The stories all over Pine Ridge. The ranger who was saved by a mother grizzly. Some of the locals are calling her the Mercy Bear now. Great, Connor muttered, slumping in his seat. Public attention was the last thing he wanted. It would make finding the bear again even more difficult if curious tourists and thrill-seekers started combing the woods looking for her. It gets worse, Savannah added as they passed a local diner, where a sandwich board advertised a new menu item, the Mercy Bear Burger. You've got to be kidding me. Welcome to Pine Ridge, where no miracle goes unexploited. Her tone was light, but Connor could sense her concern beneath the humor. All the more reason for you to lay low for a while. They drove the rest of the way in companionable silence. Savannah's cabin was a modest one-bedroom structure perched on a hillside overlooking the valley. Large windows offered views of Blackwater National Forest stretching toward the distant mountains, a constant reminder of Connor's unfinished business. "Make yourself at home," Savannah said as she helped him inside. "Bathroom's down the hall. I'll fix us some lunch." Connor moved to the large picture window while Savannah busied herself in the kitchen. From this vantage point, he could see the section of forest where he'd been found, though the exact clearing was hidden by the dense canopy of pines. Was the bear there now, moving through her territory with her cub, unaware of the stir she had caused in the human world? Or could she somehow sense that he was thinking of her, remembering her unexpected kindness? "Here," Savannah said, handing him a mug of hot coffee. "You look like you're 1,000 miles away." "Just thinking," Connor replied, accepting the mug gratefully. "About the bear?" He nodded, not bothering to deny it. Savannah joined him at the window, her own mug cupped between her hands. "You know, my grandmother was half Blackfoot. She used to tell stories about spirit animals, guides that appeared in times of need to those who respected the natural world." Connor turned to look at her, surprised. Savannah rarely spoke about her indigenous heritage or her family's beliefs. As a biologist and ranger, she typically approached wildlife management from a strictly scientific perspective. "You think that's what she was? A spirit guide?" Savannah shrugged, her eyes fixed on the distant forest. "I don't know. Science says grizzlies are just animals, acting on instinct and learned behaviors. They don't rescue humans out of compassion or moral reasoning." She took a sip of her coffee before continuing. "But my grandmother would say that sometimes the veil between our world and the spirit world thins, allowing something extraordinary to happen." "What do you believe?" Connor asked softly. She met his gaze, her dark eyes thoughtful. "I believe you experienced something profound out there. Whether it was a miracle, a spirit guide, or just a uniquely intelligent bear doesn't really matter. What matters is what you do with that experience." Before Connor could respond, Savannah's phone rang. She checked the screen and frowned. "It's Chief," she said, stepping away to answer. "Hello? Yes, he's here. We just got back from the hospital." Her expression darkened as she listened. "When? Are they sure?" More listening, then a heavy sigh. "I understand. We'll be there." She ended the call and turned to Connor, her face grim. "What's wrong?" he asked, setting down his coffee mug. "There's been a poaching incident in the eastern sector of Blackwater. 2 grizzlies found dead, stripped of their gallbladders and paws." Connor felt sick. Was it? We don't know yet. Savannah cut him off, already reaching for her jacket. But one was a female, and there was a set of small tracks nearby suggesting a cub survived. Chief wants us at the scene. I thought I was on administrative leave, Connor said, even as he moved toward the door, his earlier fatigue forgotten. You are. But given your recent experience, he thinks you might have insights about the bears that could help. 20 minutes later, they were bouncing down a Forest Service road in Savannah's truck, heading deep into the eastern section of Blackwater National Forest. Connor stared out the window at the passing trees, his heart heavy with dread. 2 dead grizzlies, a surviving cub. Could it be the same bear that had saved him? The timing seemed too coincidental. They arrived at a small clearing where several Forest Service vehicles and a Sheriff's Department SUV were already parked. Sheriff Bennett stood talking with Chief Ranger Michael Hayes, a tall, imposing man with a thick gray mustache who had served in Blackwater for over 3 decades. Both men turned as Connor and Savannah approached. Chief Hayes gave Connor a critical once-over before speaking. Adams, should you be out of the hospital? I'm fine, Chief, Connor assured him, trying to stand straighter despite the throbbing in his head that had intensified during the drive. He's not fine, Savannah countered, but he's stubborn. What have we got? The chief gestured toward a tarp-covered shape at the edge of the clearing. Female Grizzly, approximately 7 years old, shot with a high-powered rifle. Clean kill, professional job. They took the gallbladder, paws, and several other body parts. Connor moved toward the tarp, his legs feeling unsteady. I wouldn't, Sheriff Bennett warned, but Connor ignored him, using his good arm to pull back the covering. The sight hit him like a physical blow. The bear's beautiful fur was matted with blood, her massive body grotesquely mutilated where the poachers had harvested their grisly trophies. Her head remained intact, eyes closed as if in sleep, but the rest of her told a story of human greed and callousness that made Connor's stomach turn. But it wasn't his bear. This grizzly's fur was a lighter shade, more cinnamon than the rich brown he remembered. Relief flooded through him, immediately followed by shame at feeling relieved when any bear's death was a tragedy. There's another one about 50 yards that way, Chief Hayes said, pointing deeper into the forest. Male, older, same treatment. And the cub? Connor asked, letting the tarp fall back into place. Tracks lead away from the scene. Wildlife team is following them now, hoping to find it before it starves or gets taken by another predator. Connor turned back to the chief, determination overshadowing his pain. I want to help find it. Chief Hayes shook his head firmly. You're on medical leave, Adams. Observing is one thing, but... Sir, Connor interrupted, something he rarely did with his superior. I have experience with orphaned cubs, and after what happened to me, I feel responsible. Responsible? The chief's bushy eyebrows drew together. These poachings have nothing to do with your incident, don't they? Connor challenged. The story's all over town. Miracle Bear posters in shop windows. What if these poachers heard about it and came looking specifically for a mother grizzly with a cub? The chief and sheriff exchanged uneasy glances. It's possible, Sheriff Bennett admitted. The timing fits. And these kills are different from the typical poaching we see. Cleaner, more efficient. Could be professionals who followed the story here. Chief Hayes ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking every one of his 60-plus years. Damn vultures. He fixed Connor with a stern look. Fine, you can join the tracking team, but observe only. No heroics. Understood, sir. Savannah stepped forward. I'll go with him. The chief nodded, then returned to his conversation with the sheriff as Connor and Savannah headed in the direction of the cub's tracks. They walked in silence for several minutes, following flagging tape left by the wildlife team that had gone ahead. Connor's mind raced with scenarios, each more disturbing than the last. If his story had indeed attracted professional poachers to Blackwater, then his bear and her cub were in even greater danger. The thought of her meeting the same fate as the bear under the tarp filled him with a cold rage that pushed aside his physical discomfort. "Connor," Savannah said suddenly, grabbing his arm to stop him. "Look." She pointed to a clump of fur caught on a low-hanging branch. It was dark brown with silver tips, exactly like the fur of the bear that had freed him. "She was here," Connor whispered, reaching out to touch the fur. "Recently," Savannah frowned. "That's nearly 2 miles from where you were found. Would she range that far with a cub? If she was looking for food, maybe, or if something spooked her." Connor scanned the surrounding forest, a new fear taking hold. What if she heard the gunshots, came to investigate, and found the poachers? Savannah completed his thought. That would explain why the cub's tracks lead away from here. If it's her cub and it saw what happened to these other bears. A faint sound reached them, a pitiful whimpering coming from a dense thicket about 20 yards off the trail. Connor's heart jumped into his throat. "Over there," he breathed, already moving toward the sound. "Connor, wait!" Savannah hissed, but he was already pushing through the underbrush, driven by an urgency he couldn't explain. The thicket opened into a small hollow beneath a fallen log. There, curled into a trembling ball of fur, was a bear cub. Not just any cub. Connor knew immediately it was the same one that had huddled at his feet during that long, cold night. The distinctive white star-shaped patch on its chest confirmed it. "Hey there, little one," Connor said softly, crouching down a safe distance away. "Remember me?" The cub raised its head, small eyes blinking as it registered Connor's presence. It sniffed the air cautiously. "Is it the same cub?" Savannah asked from behind him, keeping her voice low. Connor nodded, not taking his eyes off the small bear. "See the white patch on its chest? Like a star. It's her cub." The cub stood on wobbling legs, making a soft huffing sound that reminded Connor painfully of its mother. It took a hesitant step toward him, then another. "Connor," Savannah warned, "be careful. It's still a wild animal." "I know," he replied, holding perfectly still as the cub approached. "But it recognizes me." Incredibly, the cub came right up to Connor, pressing its nose against his outstretched hand like a domestic dog seeking reassurance. He could feel its small body trembling. "Where's your mom, little guy?" Connor whispered, his throat tight with emotion. "Did something happen to her?" The cub made another pitiful sound, almost like a whimper, then turned and took a few steps back the way it had come, looking over its shoulder at Connor as if expecting him to follow. "I think it wants us to go with it," Connor said, getting slowly to his feet. Savannah looked skeptical. Or it's just confused and seeking any form of comfort. "Connor, we need to call this in. The wildlife team can tranquilize it, get it to a rehabilitation facility." "No," Connor said firmly. "Not yet. I think it's trying to show us something." He turned to her, his eyes pleading. "Savannah, what if its mother, my bear, is injured, not dead? What if she needs help?" Savannah hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and the extraordinary circumstances. "The chief will have our badges if we go off on our own with an orphaned cub." "Then stay here," Connor said, already moving to follow the cub, which had taken a few more steps and was looking back at them impatiently. "Call it in, but I'm going with it." "Damn it, Connor," Savannah muttered, but she fell into step beside him. 10 minutes. If we don't find anything in 10 minutes, we turn back and do this by the book. The cub led them deeper into the forest, occasionally stopping to make sure they were still following. Connor's head throbbed with each step, and his wrist ached in its sling, but he pushed the pain aside, focused entirely on the small bear guiding them through the wilderness. After about 5 minutes of walking, they came to another clearing. The cub stopped at the edge, making a distressed sound. Connor approached cautiously, scanning the open space. At first, he saw nothing unusual. Then, a slight movement caught his eye. On the far side of the clearing, half hidden by fallen leaves and forest debris, lay a large, dark shape. "There," Connor breathed, pointing. The shape moved again, the labored rise and fall of breathing. It was a bear, a large grizzly. The cub bounded across the clearing toward the prone form, making anxious noises as it circled what Connor now knew without doubt was its mother, his bear, the one who had freed him from chains and defended him against poachers. "Oh no," Savannah whispered beside him. Connor was already running, ignoring the protest from his injured body. As he drew closer, he could see that the bear was alive but badly wounded. Dark blood matted her fur in several places. Gunshot wounds, he realized with fury. She had been shot multiple times, but had somehow managed to drag herself to this sheltered spot. Her eyes, those intelligent golden eyes that had studied him by moonlight, flickered open as he approached. There was recognition there, Connor was certain of it. And something else. A plea. "Savannah," he called urgently, kneeling beside the massive bear without fear. "Call for help. Now. Tell them we need the wildlife veterinarian. Tell them to hurry." Savannah already had her radio out, speaking quickly and clearly into it, giving their location and the situation. The mother bear made a soft sound, nudging her cub with her muzzle. The little one curled up against her side, still whimpering. "Hang on, girl," Connor said, gently placing his hand on her broad head. "Help is coming. Just hang on." The bear's breathing was labored, each exhale accompanied by a pained rumble deep in her chest. Connor could see at least 3 bullet wounds, one in her shoulder, one in her flank, and one, most concerning, in her side that was bleeding heavily. "We need to slow the bleeding," he said, shrugging out of his jacket despite the cool air. "Help me." Savannah hesitated only a moment before kneeling beside him, helping him fold the jacket into a makeshift pressure bandage. Together, they pressed it against the wound in the bear's side. The grizzly growled weakly but made no move to resist their help. Her eyes remained fixed on Connor, that same intelligence and awareness he had seen in the moonlight now clouded with pain, but still unmistakably present. "Why would they do this?" Connor said through gritted teeth. "Why shoot her and not take anything? It doesn't fit the poaching pattern." Savannah's expression was grim as she helped maintain pressure on the wound. Maybe they were interrupted, or maybe what? She met his eyes over the bear's massive form. Maybe they recognized her from the descriptions, the mercy bear. Maybe this was revenge. The thought sickened Connor. Could the poachers he'd been tracking, the ones who had chained him to that tree, have sent others to eliminate the bear that had foiled their plans? It seemed far-fetched, yet the targeted nature of the attack, so different from the clean kills and harvesting of the other bears, suggested something personal. The cub pressed closer to its mother, sensing her distress. She made another soft sound, nuzzling it weakly. "Stay with us," Connor urged the bear, his voice breaking. "Your cub needs you. I need you." The words came unbidden, surprising even him. But they were true. In the few moments they had shared in that moonlit clearing, This wild creature had shown him something profound about compassion that transcended species, something he was only beginning to understand. He couldn't lose her now. Minutes stretched like hours as they waited for help to arrive. The bear's breathing grew more labored, her eyes drooping closed, then flickering open again with obvious effort. The cub continued its plaintive whimpering, pressing its small body against its mother's as if trying to share its warmth and vitality. "Connor," Savannah said softly, "I don't think she's going to make it until help comes." "She has to," he insisted, pressing harder on the wound, ignoring the blood soaking through his jacket and staining his hands. "After everything she survived, everything she did, she can't die like this." As if sensing his distress, the bear lifted her massive head slightly, her snout nudging against Connor's arm. A gesture almost like comfort. Even now, wounded and dying, she was trying to ease his pain rather than attend to her own. The realization broke something in Connor. Tears streamed down his face as he bent closer to the bear, his forehead nearly touching hers. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." The bear made a soft huffing sound, her breath warm against his skin. Then, with what seemed like tremendous effort, she pushed her cub gently toward Connor with her muzzle. The message couldn't have been clearer if she had spoken it aloud. "Take care of my child." "No," Connor choked out. "You're going to be fine. You both are." But even as he said it, he could feel the bear's breathing changing, becoming more shallow and irregular. Her golden eyes, fixed on his face with that uncanny intelligence, began to dim. The sound of vehicles approaching penetrated Connor's grief-stricken haze. Help was finally arriving. Too late, he feared, but he clung to hope nonetheless. "Here!" Savannah shouted, standing and waving her arms to guide the rescuers. "Hurry!" People crashed through the underbrush. The wildlife team, Chief Hayes, Sheriff Bennett, and a woman Connor recognized as Dr. Jessica Brooks, the park's wildlife veterinarian. "Move aside," Dr. Brooks ordered, kneeling where Connor had been and quickly assessing the bear's condition. Her experienced hands moved efficiently, checking vital signs, examining wounds. Connor stood on shaky legs, the cub pressing against him fearfully as strangers surrounded its mother. Without thinking, he reached down and lifted the small bear into his arms, cradling it against his chest to keep it from interfering with the medical efforts. Surprisingly, the cub didn't struggle, instead burrowing against him as if seeking refuge. 3 gunshot wounds, Dr. Brooks reported tersely. 1 through the shoulder, mostly muscle damage. 1 in the flank, possibly penetrated the intestines. The 3rd hit her lung. She's lost a lot of blood. She glanced up at Chief Hayes. "I need to stabilize her here before we can move her." The chief nodded grimly. "Do what you can." The next half hour was a blur of activity. Dr. Brooks worked with practiced efficiency, cleaning wounds, administering antibiotics and fluids, preparing the injured bear for transport. Connor stood at the edge of the clearing, still holding the cub, which had fallen into an exhausted sleep in his arms. Sheriff Bennett approached, his weathered face solemn. "We found casings," he said quietly. "Same caliber as the rifle we confiscated from Mercer when we arrested him and Dawson." "But they're in custody," Connor said, confused. "They are, but Mercer's brother isn't. Logan Mercer. He has a record for poaching in Montana, served time for it. I've got deputies looking for him now." Connor felt a cold rage building inside him. He did this as revenge for his brother's arrest? The sheriff nodded slowly. "Looks that way. The other bears were just cover, making it look like a regular poaching operation. But this one, He glanced toward the mother bear, now surrounded by medical personnel. This one was personal. "Will she survive?" Connor asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sheriff Bennett's expression softened with compassion. "Dr. Brooks is the best wildlife vet in 3 states. If anyone can save her, Jessica can." But it wasn't a yes, and they both knew it. Finally, the team had the mother bear stabilized enough to move. They carefully transferred her massive form onto a reinforced tarp that would serve as a makeshift stretcher to carry her to the waiting truck. Dr. Brooks approached Connor, peeling off blood-stained gloves. Her expression was guarded as she eyed the sleeping cub in his arms. "She's stable for now," she told him, "but the next 24 hours will be critical. That lung wound—" She shook her head. "I won't lie to you, Ranger Adams. It doesn't look good." Connor swallowed hard. "Where are you taking her?" "The Wildlife Rehabilitation Center has an emergency medical facility. It's our best option." "And the cub?" Connor asked, unconsciously tightening his hold on the small bear. Dr. Brooks studied him for a long moment. "Protocol says we separate them. The mother will need intensive care, and the cub will require specialized feeding and handling." "No," Connor said firmly. "They need to stay together." The veterinarian sighed. "Ranger Adams, I understand you've formed an attachment here, but we need to follow best practices for wildlife rehabilitation. Best practices don't account for bears that free humans from chains or protect them from poachers," Connor countered. "This isn't a typical case." Before Dr. Brooks could respond, Chief Hayes joined them. "What's the verdict, Doctor?" "I was just explaining to Ranger Adams that we'll need to separate the mother and cub during treatment." The chief looked at the sleeping cub in Connor's arms, then at the mother bear being carefully loaded for transport. His expression was unreadable for a long moment. "What if they stayed together?" he finally asked. "Would it harm the mother's chances of recovery?" Dr. Brooks considered this. "Not necessarily, but it would complicate treatment. And if the mother doesn't survive, the cub being present would make it messier." "And what about the cub's welfare?" the chief pressed. "Would it be better off separated from its mother at this stage?" The veterinarian hesitated. "From a purely medical standpoint, we could provide better specialized care separately, but psychologically—" She sighed. "Bears have strong bonds, especially mothers and cubs. Separation creates stress, which can impede recovery for both." Connor held his breath, afraid to hope, as he watched the chief deliberate. "Dr. Brooks," Chief Hayes finally said, "given the unique circumstances of this case, I'm authorizing an exception to standard protocol. The bears stay together during treatment. If—" he held up a hand when she began to protest, "if you believe at any point that separation becomes medically necessary, we'll revisit the decision." Relief flooded through Connor. "Thank you, Chief." The older man fixed him with a stern look. "Don't thank me yet, Adams. There's still the matter of what to do with you and that cub you're holding like a teddy bear." Connor looked down, suddenly aware of how natural it felt to have the small bear cradled against him. "Sir?" "Dr. Brooks will need all the help she can get. Since you seem to have some kind of connection with these bears, you're temporarily reassigned to assist at the rehabilitation center." His expression softened slightly. "Besides, that cub seems to trust you. Might make treatment easier." Connor nodded, not trusting himself to speak past the lump in his throat. "Savannah will drive you to the center," the chief continued. "I'll finish up here with the sheriff." He turned to go, then paused. "And Adams? That's still a wild animal you're holding. Don't forget it." "I won't, sir," Connor promised. though as he looked down at the sleeping cub, its small chest rising and falling against his arm, the line between wild and tame seemed less clear than it once had. The Wildlife Rehabilitation Center was located in a secluded valley about 20 miles from Pine Ridge. A collection of modern buildings surrounded by expansive, naturalistic enclosures, it served as both a treatment facility for injured wildlife and a permanent home for animals too habituated or injured to return to the wild. By the time Connor and Savannah arrived with the cub, the mother bear had already been moved to the emergency medical building. Dr. Brooks met them at the entrance, her scrubs now fresh, but her face etched with fatigue. "She's in surgery," she informed them. "Dr. Ethan Marshall is our best surgeon. If anyone can repair that lung, it's him." "How long will it take?" Connor asked, the now awake cub squirming in his arms. "Hours, most likely. You should get some rest. There's a staff lounge where you can wait." She eyed the cub. "We'll need to examine it as well, make sure it's not injured or malnourished." Connor nodded, following her through the facility to a room equipped with medical examination tables and various equipment. He set the cub down reluctantly, keeping a reassuring hand on its back as Dr. Brooks conducted a thorough but gentle examination. "Male, approximately 15 months old," she noted, recording observations on a tablet. "Good weight, no obvious injuries or parasites, remarkably healthy considering the circumstances." She glanced up at Connor. "You said this is the cub that was with the bear that freed you." "Yes," Connor confirmed. "I recognize the white star pattern on his chest." Dr. Brooks studied the marking. "Unusual coloration. I've only seen a few grizzlies with distinct white patches like that." She completed her examination, then straightened. "He needs food and water, but otherwise he's in good shape." "What happens now?" Connor asked. "Now we wait." She led them to another room where a large metal cage had been prepared with bedding, water, and some fruit. "The cub should stay in here while we wait for news on the mother." Connor hesitated. "Can't he stay with me?" Dr. Brooks gave him a measured look. "Ranger Adams, I understand you feel connected to these bears, but we need to maintain some professional boundaries. This is still a wild animal." As if to contradict her words, the cub pressed closer to Connor's legs, making a soft whimpering sound that tugged at his heart. Savannah, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "Dr. Brooks, I know this isn't protocol, but nothing about this situation is. If the cub is calmer with Connor, wouldn't that be better for everyone?" The veterinarian looked from the cub to Connor and back again, clearly weighing the unusual request against her training and experience. Finally, she sighed. "Fine, but he stays on a leash, and if he shows any signs of aggression or stress, he goes in the cage immediately. Clear?" "Clear," Connor agreed readily. Dr. Brooks left to check on the surgery, promising to return with updates. Savannah settled into a chair in the staff lounge, eyeing Connor as he sat on the floor with the cub exploring cautiously beside him. "You know you can't keep him, right?" she said gently. Connor nodded, watching as the cub investigated a potted plant in the corner. "I know. If his mother survives, they'll be released back into the wild together. If she doesn't," he couldn't finish the thought. "If she doesn't," Savannah continued for him, "he'll be raised here and eventually placed in a wildlife sanctuary. Either way, your part in this story has an end point." "I know that," Connor repeated, though the thought caused an unexpected ache in his chest. In just a few days, these bears had come to mean something profound to him, a connection to the wilderness he had sworn to protect that went deeper than his ranger's badge or his environmental ethics. Hours passed. The cub eventually tired of exploring and curled up beside Connor, falling into a deep sleep. Savannah left to check in with Chief Hayes, promising to return with food for the humans at least. Connor must have dozed off himself, because he jerked awake at the sound of the lounge door opening. Dr. Brooks entered, accompanied by a tall man in surgical scrubs who Connor assumed must be Dr. Marshall. "Ranger Adams," Dr. Brooks said, her tone giving nothing away. "This is Dr. Ethan Marshall, our wildlife surgeon." Connor carefully shifted the sleeping cub and got to his feet, anxiety clawing at his throat. "How is she?" Dr. Marshall removed his surgical cap, revealing short salt and pepper hair. His face was lined with exhaustion, but his eyes were kind as he extended a hand to Connor. "She's alive," he said simply. "The surgery was complex. The bullet damaged her lung and nicked an artery. She lost a lot of blood, but we managed to repair the damage. The next 24 to 48 hours will be critical." Relief made Connor's knees weak. "But she has a chance." "A fighting chance, yes. She's strong, and her overall health before the shooting was excellent." Dr. Marshall studied Connor with curious eyes. "Dr. Brooks told me the story about how this bear supposedly freed you from chains and protected you from poachers. I have to admit, I was skeptical." "Most people are," Connor acknowledged. The surgeon smiled slightly. "I've worked with wildlife for over 20 years, Ranger Adams. I've seen behaviors that defy the textbooks. Animals are more complex than we give them credit for." He glanced down at the sleeping cub. "The fact that her cub trusts you enough to sleep at your feet speaks volumes." "Can I see her?" Connor asked. The doctors exchanged glances before Dr. Brooks nodded. "Briefly. She's still heavily sedated, but it might actually be good for the cub to see his mother, to know she's still alive." Connor gently woke the cub, which blinked up at him groggily before climbing to its feet. Dr. Marshall led them through a series of corridors to a large, specially equipped recovery room. Inside, on a reinforced examination table surrounded by monitoring equipment, lay the mother bear. Connor's breath caught at the sight of her. Her magnificent fur had been shaved in several places to accommodate surgical sites and IV lines. Bandages wrapped her torso, and a tube in her throat helped her breathe. Yet, even in this vulnerable state, she radiated a presence that filled the room, a quiet dignity that touched something deep in Connor's soul. The cub let out a soft whimper of recognition, straining toward its mother. Connor carefully lifted the small bear onto a stool beside the table, allowing it to see and smell the mother bear, while ensuring it couldn't disturb the medical equipment. "She's heavily sedated," Dr. Marshall explained quietly. "But bears have an excellent sense of smell. She may be aware of your presence at some level." Connor approached the massive head of the bear, now peaceful in unconsciousness. Hesitantly, he placed his hand on her forehead, feeling the coarse fur beneath his fingers. "Thank you," he whispered, too softly for the doctors to hear, "for everything. Now it's my turn to help you." The days that followed took on a strange rhythm. Connor practically lived at the rehabilitation center, sleeping on a cot in the staff lounge, dividing his time between caring for the cub and sitting with the mother bear during her slow recovery. Chief Hayes had officially extended his leave, recognizing that Connor's presence seemed to have a calming effect on both bears. Dr. Brooks, initially skeptical of Connor's involvement, gradually came to accept and even welcome his help. The cub, whom the staff had started calling Star for the white marking on his chest, was remarkably well behaved with Connor, following basic commands and accepting necessary medical procedures with minimal stress. On the 5th day after the surgery, Connor was dozing in a chair beside the mother bear's recovery bed when a change in the rhythm of the heart monitor woke him. He opened his eyes to find himself staring directly into the golden gaze of the fully conscious Grizzly. His breath caught. There was recognition in those eyes. Unmistakable, undeniable recognition. "Hey there," he said softly, not moving from his chair to avoid startling her. "Welcome back." The bear made a soft huffing sound, her eyes never leaving his face. Slowly, cautiously, Connor reached out his hand, palm up, stopping a few inches from her muzzle. For several heartbeats, neither moved. Then, with deliberate gentleness, the bear extended her massive head just enough to touch her nose to Connor's fingertips. A greeting, an acknowledgement, a renewal of the strange bond formed in moonlight and chains. Dr. Marshall, entering the room for a routine check, froze in the doorway at the sight. "Remarkable," he breathed. "I've never seen anything like it." The mother bear's recovery progressed steadily after that. The breathing tube was removed, then the IVs, until finally she was able to stand and move around the large, secure recovery room. Star was reunited with her, their joyful reunion bringing tears to the eyes of even the most scientifically minded staff members. 2 weeks after the surgery, Dr. Marshall and Dr. Brooks called a meeting with Connor, Chief Hayes, and Sheriff Bennett to discuss the bear's future. "She's making an excellent recovery," Dr. Marshall reported. "Better than I would have expected given the severity of her injuries." "So, what's next?" Chief Hayes asked. "When can they be released back into the wild?" The doctors exchanged glances before Dr. Brooks spoke. "That's what we need to discuss. Normally, we would release them in a remote section of the park, far from human activity. But this situation is complicated." "Because of their connection with Connor?" Savannah asked. She had been a frequent visitor to the center, helping with Star's care when Connor needed rest. "Partly," Dr. Brooks acknowledged, "but also because of what happened. These bears have been targeted once. The poacher responsible, Logan Mercer, is still at large. If we release them back into Blackwater, they could be at risk." Sheriff Bennett nodded grimly. "We've been tracking Mercer for weeks. Got close a few times, but he knows the backcountry well. Could be months before we catch him." A heavy silence fell over the room as they considered the implications. "What about relocation?" Connor suggested. "Move them to another forest, far from here?" Dr. Marshall shook his head. "Bears have strong territorial instincts. Studies show that relocated bears often try to return to their original territory, sometimes traveling hundreds of miles to do so. It puts them at risk, crossing roads, entering populated areas." "So, what are you suggesting?" Chief Hayes asked. "That they stay in captivity permanently?" Dr. Brooks sighed. "It might be the safest option, at least until Mercer is caught, but—" She glanced at Connor. "There's another possibility we've been discussing." All eyes turned to her expectantly. "The Blackwater Bear Sanctuary," she said. "It's a 5,000-acre protected area within the National Forest, already fenced and secured for bear rehabilitation. It's used primarily for training cubs to survive in the wild before full release, but it could serve as a temporary home for these too. The sanctuary has been closed for renovations for the past year," Chief Hayes pointed out. "The renovations are nearly complete," Dr. Brooks countered. "And here's what makes this option unique. The sanctuary needs a new resident manager, someone to live on site, monitor the bears, maintain the facilities." Connor felt his pulse quicken as he realized where this was heading. "Are you suggesting—" "We're suggesting you, Ranger Adams," Dr. Marshall confirmed. "You've demonstrated an unusual connection with these bears, particularly the mother. Your presence seems to ease their stress, which will be crucial for her continued recovery." Chief Hayes frowned. "You're talking about taking one of my best rangers off regular duty to babysit 2 bears?" "Not just any bears, Chief," Sheriff Bennett interjected quietly. "The bears that may have saved his life. Bears that have shown intelligence and behavior that could teach us something important about these animals we share the wilderness with." Connor hardly dared to hope. Would it be temporary? Just until Mercer's caught? Dr. Brooks and Dr. Marshall exchanged another look. "Initially, yes," Dr. Brooks said carefully. "But depending on how the mother's recovery progresses and how they adapt to the sanctuary, it could become a longer arrangement." The conversation continued for hours, weighing options, considering logistics, evaluating risks. By the end, a plan had been formed, one that seemed to balance the needs of the bears with the realities of wildlife management and law enforcement. 3 weeks later, Connor stood at the gate of the Blackwater Bear Sanctuary, watching as the specially designed transport crates containing the mother bear and Star were carefully unloaded from the trucks. The newly renovated sanctuary was even more impressive than he'd remembered from his few previous visits. 5,000 acres of pristine forest and meadow, surrounded by unintrusive but effective fencing, with a modern cabin near the main entrance to serve as both visitor center and residence for the manager. For him, this would be his home now, at least for the foreseeable future. Savannah came to stand beside him as the wildlife team prepared to open the crates in the soft light of dawn. "Having second thoughts?" she asked quietly. Connor shook his head. "Number?" "This feels right, like it's what I'm supposed to do." She smiled, nudging his shoulder with hers. "The mysterious ranger who speaks bear. You're going to become a legend in these parts." "I just hope I don't let them down," he said, watching as Dr. Brooks and Dr. Marshall made final preparations. "They've been through so much already." "You won't," Savannah assured him. She hesitated, then added, "You know, my grandmother would say this was always your path, that the bear chose you that night for a reason." Before Connor could respond, Dr. Brooks approached. "We're ready. Would you like to do the honors?" Connor nodded, following her to where the crates had been positioned at the edge of a beautiful meadow dotted with wildflowers. The morning sun bathed the scene in golden light, making the dew sparkle on the grass like scattered diamonds. With careful movements, Connor unlatched Star's crate first. The cub, now familiar with the routine of transport, emerged cautiously, sniffing the air of his new home. When he spotted Connor, he made a beeline for him, pressing against his legs in what had become their familiar greeting. "Hey, buddy," Connor said softly, kneeling to ruffle the fur between the cub's ears. "What do you think of your new home?" Next came the moment Connor had been both anticipating and dreading. Dr. Marshall nodded, and Connor moved to the larger crate, unlatching it with hands that trembled slightly. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with deliberate dignity, the mother bear emerged. She looked magnificent. Her wounds had healed well, her fur growing back where it had been shaved for surgery. Though she would always bear the scars of her ordeal, her strength and vitality had returned in full. She stood tall, surveying her new surroundings with alert eyes, her powerful muscles shifting beneath her thick coat. Star bounded over to his mother, circling her excitedly. She nuzzled him briefly, then raised her head to look directly at Connor. Everyone present held their breath. This was the moment of truth. Would she remember him outside the confines of the rehabilitation center? Would she still accept his presence now that she was stronger, more capable of defending herself and her cub? Connor took a step forward, then another, maintaining eye contact with the massive bear. When he was about 10 feet away, he stopped and slowly extended his hand, palm up, as he had done that first day of her conscious recovery. The bear regarded him steadily, her golden eyes unreadable. Then, with a grace that belied her size, she approached him. The wildlife team tensed, hands moving toward the tranquilizer guns just in case, but Connor remained perfectly still, trust radiating from every fiber of his being. The mother bear stopped just short of his outstretched hand. For a heartbeat that seemed to stretch into eternity, they gazed at each other. Human and bear, rescuer and rescued, two souls connected by an act of compassion that defied explanation. Then, in a moment that none of the witnesses would ever forget, the bear gently pressed her nose against Connor's palm, an acknowledgement, a promise, a silent pact between two species so often at odds. Tears sprang to Connor's eyes, blurring his vision as the bear stepped back, nudged her cub, and together they moved unhurriedly across the meadow toward the forest beyond, pausing once to look back at the human who had become so improbably entwined in their lives. "Goodbye for now," Connor whispered, though they were too far away to hear. "I'll be here when you return." And he knew, with a certainty that transcended rational thought, that they would return. That this was not an ending, but a beginning, the first chapter in a story of trust and understanding between human and bear that would unfold in ways none of them could yet imagine. As the bears disappeared into the trees, Dr. Brooks came to stand beside Connor, unexpected emotion making her usually professional voice rough. "In all my years working with wildlife," she said softly, "I've never seen anything like that. It's as if she understands who you are, what you did for her." Connor smiled through his tears, his eyes still fixed on the spot where the bears had vanished. "Maybe she does," he replied. "Or maybe she's teaching me something I needed to learn." "And what's that?" Dr. Brooks asked. Connor turned to face the assembled group, the doctors who had saved the bear's life, the rangers and sheriff who had supported this unconventional arrangement, and Savannah, whose belief in the possibility of something extraordinary had never wavered. "That compassion isn't just a human trait," he said simply, "that the bonds that connect us to the natural world run deeper than we can imagine, and that sometimes the most profound lessons come from the most unexpected teachers." In the months and years that followed, the story of the Mercy Bear and the ranger she had saved spread far beyond the boundaries of Blackwater National Forest. Researchers came from universities across the country to observe the unique relationship between Connor and the bears, documenting behaviors that challenged conventional understanding of wildlife cognition and emotion. Logan Mercer was eventually captured trying to cross the Canadian border, bringing closure to the case and justice for the slain bears. Under Connor's management, the Blackwater Bear Sanctuary became a model for wildlife rehabilitation and conservation education. But for Connor Adams, the greatest reward was much more personal. Each day brought new discoveries, new moments of connection with the bears who had changed his life. Star grew into a powerful young male, but retained his curious, trusting nature. The mother bear, whom Connor had finally named Mercy, embracing the title given by the townspeople, remained a majestic, independent creature, coming and going as she pleased within the sanctuary's boundaries. But on quiet evenings, when the sanctuary was closed to visitors and the forest settled into twilight stillness, she would often appear at the edge of the clearing near Connor's cabin. Sometimes she would simply watch from a distance as he sat on the porch. Other times she would approach, allowing him to sit near her in companionable silence as Star played nearby. In those moments no words were needed between them. They had both been broken, by chains, by bullets, by the cruelty that humans could inflict. And they had both been healed, by compassion, by connection, by the profound understanding that sometimes crossed the boundaries between species. It was during one such evening, nearly a year after the bears had come to the sanctuary, that Connor witnessed something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. As the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Mercy approached his porch carrying something gently in her mouth. With deliberate care, she set it at his feet. A small piece of the chain that had once bound him to a tree in the forest, somehow recovered from that distant clearing. As Connor picked up the rusted link, tears filling his eyes at the significance of the gesture, Mercy met his gaze with her intelligent golden eyes. In that moment, he understood with perfect clarity that some bonds could never be broken, not those forged in metal by human hands, but those created in the heart by acts of mercy that transcended the natural order and reminded all who witnessed them of what was truly wild and what was truly human. And sometimes, as a bear and a ranger had discovered under a moonlit sky, those distinctions weren't as clear as we might believe. For in the end, compassion knew no species, kindness no boundaries, and love, in all its unexpected forms, no limits to where it might take root and flourish. In a world often defined by divisions, theirs was a story of connection, and in a wilderness full of dangers, theirs was a tale of unexpected grace. A ranger and a bear, forever linked by chains broken and hearts mended, teaching all who heard their story that sometimes the most powerful bonds are those we never saw coming, with creatures we were taught to fear but learned to love instead.